on the table right now. Jeremy, we'll come back to you in just a second.
Maria Zakharova, who is the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, uses Facebook to communicate most frequently, put out a statement just an hour or so ago in response to the Trump tweet threatening to send missiles against Syria. And what she said was that smart missiles should fly towards terrorists, not the legal government that has been fighting international terrorism for several years on its territory. And by the way, she went on to say, were the OPCW inspectors, those are the chemical weapons inspectors, warned that smart missiles will destroy all evidence of chemical weapons use on the ground? And what she's trying to imply there, which is a long-standing Russian position going back to the beginning of the year, is a suggestion that they had intelligence ahead of time, that there were militant groups from within the rebels in Syria who were planning what they call a false flag atrocity, the use of chemical weapons that would then be blamed on the Syrians. The Russians have vacillated between suggesting that there weren't any use of chemical weapons whatsoever, or indeed that if there were, it was done by the rebels. This, of course, running counter to the statements coming out of Sergei Lavrov just 24 hours ago, in which he said Russian inspectors and experts had actually been to the site of the latest alleged atrocity, and there was no evidence whatsoever for chemical weapons use. I should also say, Maggie, that there have been reports of significant movements of materiel, the mechanisms of war, aircraft, trucks, and other things from within the Syrian armed forces to Latakia, which is the headquarters, really, of the Assad regime culturally, but also very much where most of the Russian forces are based. An implication there that by co-locating them, Syrian assets with Russian assets, makes them a lot harder for the Americans to strike, Maggie.
Yeah, and Sam, just remind us the presence that Russia has in the area there when they say that they're willing and ready to shoot down any American missiles that might be coming. Bring us up to date on what sort of resources Russia has in place in Syria.
Well, right back when the Russians moved into Syria, they added to the existing Syrian air defenses, which were pretty substantial because of course, the Syrians have had a constant pressure from the Israeli Air Force over many years. So they already had S-300 surface-to-air missiles. Those were augmented with more from Russia, more sophisticated missiles, the S-400s and others have been brought in. Much more sophisticated radar, anti-missile missiles are available. There's a significant Russian naval presence at Tartus and many large numbers of Russian aircraft. Indeed, Russian aircraft probably outnumber Syrian aircraft in that theater now and have been involved, perhaps not in the use of chemical weapons, but certainly in bombing civilian areas, going back right to the campaign, you'll recall, Maggie, with a very heavy campaign of bombing against Aleppo and the targeting of hospitals. A lot of those atrocities were laid at the feet of the Russian Air Force back then. So they have a substantial presence, and certainly that would cause a degree of difficulty for any Allied aircraft flying over Syrian airspace, putting pressure really on the Allies and Donald Trump in particular, now that he's made this threat to use what he calls smart missiles rather than traditional air assets. By that I mean aircraft. They would be much more vulnerable to Russian air defenses if it came to that. Maggie?
Jeremy, it is worth underscoring as Donald Trump goes down this road, it is such a marked difference from what we saw just a short time ago when he was reluctant to say anything negative about Russia.
Absolutely. You know, it really is an interesting turn here. And it comes, of course, as the president is against Putin. You know, when the president criticized Russia over these chemical weapons attacks with which the United States seems to believe the Syrian regime is responsible for, but Russia backs them. That seemed to be the first time that the president had called out Vladimir Putin by name. And it is interesting because over the course of the last year or so, the president president's administration. We've seen his administration actually take some pretty tough action with regards to Russia on the policy front, but the president himself had been relatively mute, and now we are seeing the president start to bring out the rhetoric when it comes to Russia here, criticizing them directly for these actions, and certainly it does come as there is this ratcheting of tensions, not only on the rhetorical front but on the military front, with the president warning of these missiles incoming and that Russia should ready itself to defend the Syrian regime if that is indeed their plan based on what they've said.
An important morning, a lot of stories we're going to continue to watch. Thanks to both you, Jeremy and Sam. Now, as we saw in his last tweet that we read just moments ago, Donald Trump's been lashing out over the FBI raid on his lawyer's office on the Russia investigation. The raid on the office he's called unthinkable, bad, and this man could soon pay the price for the president's outrage, as Abby Phillip reports.
Multiple sources tell CNN that President Trump is considering firing Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, a move that's